Hello, and welcome to the Wildlife Garden. I'm Mattie Varvaro, and I'm a Master Gardener with Cornell Cooperative Extension in Valhalla, New York. And I'm here today to take you through some principles for creating a natural wildlife habitat that will welcome birds and butterflies to your garden. So first of all, just to begin, why would we even be interested in creating a wildlife garden? Why make something that is friendly towards some of the wildlife that is out there? Well, from a quote from John Muir, who is an American naturalist, he said, "Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and cheer and give strength to body and soul alike." And I really think that sums it up so well. But there are a couple other things that we should be concerned about. Well, certainly for our pleasure, enjoyment, and education, what better thing than hearing the first birds in the springtime singing and flowers blooming, and also seeing a beautiful butterfly on a flower, and also a grandmother sharing the experiences of gardening with her grandson. All of those are really important things and aspects to creating a natural garden. There are some serious things too, though. We need to learn to nurture nature and look to help restore the natural habitats that have been lost to commercial and residential development, to deforestation, to loss of wetlands, meadows, and prairies, and to pollution, acid rain, and chemicals. These are serious things. We've lost a great number of songbirds and butterflies because of these issues, as well as many other species of wildlife, and it's very important for us to nurture nature and help restore. Another aspect is to reduce maintenance and dependence on chemical herbicides and pesticides. These things enter into our own water system, our own food supply, so they also can affect humans as well as wildlife. The saying, "think globally and act locally," certainly is relevant today as it was years ago. Each one of us can help restore the balance of nature. Even just one garden, even just one small section of a garden, or a small patio garden, one yard, one community at a time. Look right here in Pleasantville. What the Pleasantville Garden Club has done is wonderful in terms of creating natural garden habitats all throughout the community. And that certainly helps to support wildlife, and it certainly is a great thing that's being done. Here's another quote from John Muir. "When one tugs at a single thing in nature, he finds it attached to the rest of the world." And it's basically true. We all are attached together, and it's important to recognize that and help support the nature that we're attached to. Okay, so let's go on. What does it take to design a natural habitat garden? Well, I like to start with taking stock. And say you're a bird flying around in the environment, and you want to take a look from a bird's eye view. In other words, look at the broad macro perspective of the environment around you. And that little bird's going to see that diversity is the spice of life. And we should also take that into consideration when we landscape and garden, that we do it thoughtfully and that we try to replicate a structurally diverse and natural habitat. Now, if you were a butterfly flying around, where would you rather live? In this yard or in this yard? Well, there's no question I would want to live in this yard. It's just so absolutely inviting and beautiful, much better than living in, and let me go back, in this yard, which is just one single species or a monoculture. The turf or the grasses that we grow, the yards that we create, really are not very supportive of much of anything except maybe a few earthworms and maybe a few robins, and that's it. But if we go back to this, just think of all the species of birds and butterflies and other wildlife that can be supported in a natural environment like this. So moving on in designing, what we need to look at is and evaluate is the natural environment around us. What kinds of trees grow in our neighborhood? What kinds of shrubbery grows in the parks and along the sides of the roads? What kinds of natural plantings occur in a broader area, not just in our own backyard? What kinds of lighting conditions are present, throughout the different times of year and the different seasons? What kind of soil conditions? What kind of pH is there in the soil? That really is very important to know for the types of things that you can or cannot grow. The other thing, prevailing winds, is especially important when it comes to butterflies. If you're in a very windy area, it could be a concern, and you may need to design your garden to accommodate those butterflies who don't like the winds blowing around on them. So basically what we're looking to do is recreate the vertical levels of plant growth found in local natural areas. And from this picture you can see, hopefully, that we have trees, high trees in the background, and lower underbrush growing, and then finally our flowers of perennials and annuals. Another principle is to provide the basic four, and that's food, water, shelter, places to raise young, next principle, we want to limit the size of your lawn. I mean, a lawn is beautiful to look at, and certainly manicured lawns are very popular in our area. The trouble is they do require a lot of maintenance and a lot of resources, and usually depend on chemicals to stay looking nice. So for those reasons alone, it's easier to get rid of that lawn. Put in some flowers, change it. Think about how it would be without having such an expansive lawn. Think of adding more variety to that backyard. Certainly if you have vines growing, leave them if you can, or plant them. A house covered in Virginia creeper may not be the most desirable, but certainly if you have a Virginia creeper growing on a tree or on a fence post or somewhere else, and it's not doing any harm to anyone, let it grow. It's one of the most valuable resources available for birds. Leave some leaf litter or brush piles, log piles, shrubbery. Again, we have a tendency to want to clear everything out, get those leaf blowers out, and clear all the rubbish away from our yards, our gardens, our bushes. And it's really not the best thing at all. It's better to leave some of that litter and that debris. The birds really depend on the bugs that are found underneath the litter and the leaves. And butterflies certainly need it for places to lay eggs and for caterpillars to have a food source. So don't be so tidy. It's okay to be a little bit of a messy gardener. Very important not to use pesticides and herbicides. And if you do, use them sparingly. And when you do, try and use them in a more focused way. Instead of broadcasting across a whole lawn or a group of plants, go and individually treat a weed or treat an infestation problem. The trouble with the pesticides is that many birds are poisoned by them. They either ingest the insects or the worms or the seeds from the plants or the grass that's been treated with these chemicals. Some that are especially toxic, which we'd like to bring to your attention, are these four: furidane, spectricide, dursban, and kelthane. Again, very harmful to the birds and can also be very harmful to the insects or the caterpillars that produce butterflies. Instead, encourage natural insect and disease predators. Ladybugs absolutely love aphids, so encourage ladybugs as a natural predator to aphids. Or even the birds alone. They're great insecticides. Granted, you don't want the birds eating your caterpillars that become butterflies, but they do quite a job on eating so many harmful or less desirable bugs. Another principle, use compost for soil enrichment and fertilization. Compost is also known as black gold. It's a wonderful fertilizer. It's really the best thing and certainly can either help decrease or eliminate the dependence on chemicals as fertilizers. You can get compost from your local community, you can buy it in nurseries, or you can just do your own in a small section of your garden or your backyard. So if anything, composting is one of the best things that you can do for your garden. Also, using more drought-resistant and native species of plants is very important. Certainly in the past years we've realized how important having enough potable water is for us to consume, and not to use water unwisely in watering plants when we don't need to. One of the answers is to use drought-resistant plants and native plants, because they're used to our environment and they're used to the conditions that we have, and they can survive and be much hardier and more productive. We want to avoid invasive, non-native plants, things like loosestrife. Here it is August and the loosestrife is starting to bloom along the roadsides and in meadows and things. And it looks beautiful. The purple flowers are absolutely gorgeous, but they're short-lived and they also take over everything. What happens is they now become a monoculture, that one single species of plant, and they push out all the other species of plants so that really it's not supporting much of anything except a limited number of species. So try to avoid any invasive non-native plants or bringing in any type of exotic plants into the garden. You want to prune correctly by different growth patterns and flowering periods. Certainly you don't want to cut off blooms that could be beneficial to a hummingbird, or cut off right after flowering and cut different berries that the birds might want to be eating during different times of the seasons. So make sure you know your plants and when to prune them. We all love them, the cats and dogs that are our pets, but they are predators, especially to the birds, so please try to keep them indoors or away from the garden. Now I'd like to go into some very specific types of things. I'll talk about birds and then I'll talk about butterflies. Some additional things that you can do to encourage these two varieties to come. First of all, for birds, you want to select plants that will provide nutritional foods during different seasons. And certainly during winter and early spring, it's very important to have food available when birds are migrating or overwintering. And certainly during growing season and nesting season, plants for nectar, plants that provide seeds, and plants that provide fruits for all birds throughout the different seasons. Also provide at least one clump of conifers or evergreen plants for protection, for roosting, and for nesting. And you can see in this picture, it's very easy to incorporate, in this case it's a blue spruce, into the garden. It's very attractive, the color is very nice, fits very well into that garden setting, and supports the birds very nicely. Spare a dead tree, or another term for it is a snag, for birds to perch and nest and to find food. You don't want a tree that's going to fall on your house and cause damage, but certainly if you can allow a dead tree there, it's great resource for especially woodpeckers. Very importantly is to supply a source of water, especially in winter. It is probably the most important thing for birds in winter. They can find food for the most part, but they can't always find water because it's either frozen or in the form of snow, which they can't take in. So if you can in any way provide water, that is one of the best things you can do for birds in the winter. And certainly there are a variety, a whole host of ways to provide water for birds throughout the summertime and the springtime. And also you can provide artificial bird baths. But a couple tips: keep the depth shallow to 2 or 3 inches, and if you can, have some movement either with a mister or spraying device, and make sure you position it in a place where the birds have protection, because a wet bird is a vulnerable bird. They do not like a bird bath that is out in the open and has no protection. The other thing is you can provide nest boxes. But pay attention to the size of the hole and the diameter of that hole, because that determines the species that will be attracted. It doesn't have to be a fancy bird box. It can be a simple wooden box, but just pay attention to the size of the hole. And there are books that will tell you the size of hole and the types of birds that are attracted. And certainly bluebirds and bluebird boxes are very common, but there are many other types of and species of birds that can be supported with nest boxes. Some birds build their own, and they'll chisel away and get into that tree, and some will certainly start from scratch and build their own. And you can also supplement natural food sources with a variety of feeders and types of foods. Bird watching is one of the most popular activities and one of the most growing activities in this country today. And there's a whole host of feeders that are adaptable to different types of birds and different types of seeds, squirrel-proof feeders, multiple levels and multiple types of things, feeders that are nectar feeders for hummingbirds, suet feeders, you name it, it's out there. So if you have the inclination, add a little extra to the bird feeding. And hopefully you'll see this type of scene in your backyard with a string of goldfinches sitting there giving you pleasure and an enjoyment, or a hummingbird coming to take a sip of nectar. Speaking of hummingbirds, just a couple little special things about them. John James Audubon, who's the famous bird naturalist, called them glittering garments of the rainbow. And I think that's a very appropriate term because they are absolutely beautiful and they are like glittering garments of the rainbow. They have some special needs. They are nectar feeders. And their favorite types of flowers for nectar, there are a couple guiding principles, which if you include these when you're planting some of your flowers, hopefully you'll attract some hummingbirds. They love reds and purples in terms of color, but the most important thing is that it be a tube-shaped flower, because their long beak, which we'll go back to, as you can see, the long beak and the hovering that they do, they need to get into a flower that is a tube shape. Birds can't smell for the most part, so scent is not an issue when it comes to flowers. But make sure you provide different types of tube-shaped flowers throughout varying bloom times. Hummingbirds do migrate back in the springtime, and at that time they need nectar in order to keep going to wherever they will reside for the summer, or just to provide food for their own new little hummingbirds that they'll be nesting with. And natives, again, are often very important in terms of providing nectar. And here you can see the type of tube-shaped flower that a hummingbird will hover over and collect nectar. Now I'm going to move on to butterflies and some tips for welcoming butterflies into your garden. With butterflies, one of the first important principles is to research the type of butterflies you want to attract, and then the nectar flowers and larval flowers, or host plants, that they prefer. Butterflies are very specific in terms of what they like to eat, as well as what the caterpillars or the larvae like to eat for that particular species of butterfly. So it's very important to understand what is available in your general area, what types of butterflies, and then also what kinds of things do they like to eat. You want to position your plants in a sunny location, preferably a southern exposure that's sheltered from the wind. Butterflies do not like wind, and they do need the warmth of the sun in order to generate energy for flying. Again, try and maintain that diversity in height and color and blooming periods, so you go throughout the whole season providing food for them. It's interesting, you might think that butterflies only drink nectar as their food source, but that's certainly a primary source of food. But there are some butterflies that also use sap from broken twigs and broken trees. So that's also another food source. Juices from overripe fruit, so perhaps some apples that may have fallen down on the ground from a tree, or even putting out a slice of watermelon might attract a butterfly to come and drink the juice from that slice of watermelon. Fluid from animal feces, kind of an unusual thing, but they actually need some of the nutrients that can be found in animal feces. And certainly artificial nectar from feeders can be used as well. Again, butterflies prefer certain types of flowers, and the principle is for you to get a feeling for the type of flower and not specific plants. You know, during this time there are many references available for you to see what plants attract what butterflies. But in general, if you provide red, yellow, orange, and purple colored flowers, flowers that are flat and clustered, because the butterfly needs a landing pad in order to then drink the nectar, as opposed to a hummingbird which hovers, the butterfly lands on that flat flower. They love heavily perfumed flowers, so fragrant flowers are definitely a plus. And again, natives, not exotic hybrids. And I'm going to take you through a variety of pictures so you can see how the butterflies land and how they use those flat flowers in order to obtain their food sources. And here you see a cluster of flowers that butterfly is using. So it's just to give you the feeling of the principle of the type of flowers that the butterflies like. And here, a piece of rotting fruit. The other aspect is to grow host plants. for butterfly egg laying and for larva or caterpillar food. Again, very specific needs when it comes to what plants the butterfly will use to lay its eggs and also for the larva to eat. Here we have a tiger swallowtail. It's often called a parsley butterfly because it feeds on members of the parsley family, so dill, parsley, fennel, that type of thing. So if you plant some herbs, you'll attract the types of larvae for particular butterflies. This is the monarch butterfly caterpillar, and again, monarchs require milkweed. It is one of the only plants that the monarch will use, so it becomes a very important food source all around. One of the main principles is to grow clumps of the most favored species of plants and flowers based on their color, their scent, and their shape. So instead of just having isolated one or two plants scattered about, really focus on clustering. Even if you have fewer numbers or varieties, sooner cluster a larger number in terms of their colors and also their shapes. And also intersperse some of those different herbs like chives or catmint or parsley, fennel, dill, because those will also support the butterfly caterpillars. And here you can see a picture that shows that clumping aspect and the variety of heights of different plants. You want to leave some undisturbed corners for weedy larvae and nectar plants. Again, a messy garden is fine when it comes to a natural wildlife garden. One of the behaviors of butterflies is called puddling, and what they will do is go to mud puddles or muddy areas and drink the nutrients out of that mud puddle. Well, you could help them by providing a shallow water source and put some table salt in there with a little dirt and create a little mud puddle for them so that they can get their essential nutrients from that mud puddle. Also, you can provide a rock or a log pile in a sunny location for butterfly bathing and for hibernation. Many butterflies will hibernate or overwinter in our area, so this will give them a perfect place to do that. And for butterfly bathing, they love to spread their wings and gather the energy from the sun's rays, and if you can provide a nice rocky or sunny location, they'd like to do that for you. You can also supplement shelter with butterfly hibernation boxes. It's kind of questionable whether they work, but they also are a nice design element in the garden. So you might want to include that as well. There's some additional tips I'd like to leave you with. One is, one man's junk is another man's treasure. Is it a weed or is it a valuable plant? And certainly in the case of milkweed, it really turns out to be a very valuable plant, even though even its name says weed, milkweed. It's very important for sustaining monarch butterflies. Also very important for birds. A lot of them use some of the seeds for food and for lining their nests. The same for thistle, a common roadside weed that we would often try and get rid of. It really can be a treasure for our wildlife. And I guess you can't live in our area without addressing some unwanted wildlife. Our squirrels, raccoons, woodchucks, and of course deer. Well, we can look to discourage them with a variety of products, and a lot of those do work. In some cases, you may want to try and feed them and keep them happy and away from the area you don't want them in. And the other thing I like to think of is that we just make peace with them. And certainly making peace with a very sweet-looking fawn. Going back to John Muir, we're all tied together. And certainly one of the best things you can do is invest in a pair of binoculars and enjoy the show, because there really is a great show out there, and you just need to take a little time and invest a little energy, and you'll have a wonderful show to watch. And hopefully if you apply some of these principles, you'll have a bunch of happy little critters just like we have here. So I enjoyed talking to you today, and I'd like to thank you for joining us, and I'd like to wish you happy wildlife gardening.